We are Generation 1.5 because our weekends were spent on those construction sites and we got to see the growth in our family. My evenings are now spent at city council meetings and planning and zoning. That's the true bread and butter of our business. With our generation, we are so relational and not transactional. Money's great and money's important, but the people want to have purpose, they want to be authentic, and they want to be able to relate to someone.
Hey there, and welcome to your Next Gen Friend, a Successors Guide to Business Transition, a podcast for figuring out what's next in or beyond your family business. I'm Andrea Carpenter, transition strategist and second gen. Around here, we talk about the real stuff, family dynamics, identity, leadership, wealth, and how to define success on your own terms. Here's to finding your own way forward. I'm so glad you're here. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Your Next Gen Friend podcast. Today, I am super excited to be here with JR, and we're going to talk about potentially both of our lives growing up as Generation 1.5, the power of peer learning, and I'm just excited to see where this conversation goes. So a quick introduction. Jehan J.R. Ramji, he goes by JR, is a 20-year-old from Dallas, the eldest of 7 siblings, and a rising leader in both real estate and next-gen wealth. He works at Victory Real Estate Group, which is his family's company founded by his dad. And at Victory, JR runs leasing and is now stepping into development, while also launching his own capital platform and co-founding NextGenX, a fast-growing peer network for rising generation family leaders. So JR, welcome on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's just do a little bit of origin story. Who is JR? Tell us things about you, life growing up, a little bit of your story.
Sure, of course. Well, I'll backtrack a little bit and kind of talk through the family first, right? Because I think that is super important into how I ended up in the family business, right? So my father is my role model and someone I'm extremely close with, but he is the true definition of a rags to riches story. So my father is originally from London, England, moved to the United States at 7 years old. He lived in a Motel 6 in Lubbock with his family because my grandfather had a job opportunity to work security at that hotel. And so a few years later, they ended up moving to Dallas, and my grandmother actually worked at a cafe called Pete's Cafe, which is still around today. And she used to run that cafe, and my father worked, at the cash register. And unfortunately, when they were working there, they were robbed, and both my grandmother and my father were held at gunpoint. And that sparked a fire in my father, and he said, I want a different life for my family. So about a year later, he wrote a note to my grandparents and left high school. He dropped out at the age of 15 and moved to New York City with 2 of his friends in a U-Haul van with the impression, we're going to get rich and come back. They saw Wall Street, they saw wealth. They said, we're going to go to New York and get rich and come back. And 2 years later, that did not happen. He was working valet for those 2 years. And when he came back, he had an opportunity to work in the flea market selling T-shirts. And so he did really well in that and knew he was good at sales, quite honestly, and saved up about $100,000 and used that as a down payment to buy his first dry cleaning store. Now, he did really well in the dry cleaning store. He was doing everything also, right? He was running the business. He was also hand pressing clothes. And he ended up franchising that off and built that to a few hundred locations. And, at the time, he said, I don't want my legacy to be known as being a dry cleaner. So he ended up selling that business, and he went from being on the tenant side and said, hey, I want to be on the landlord side. And so he did exactly that. And about 25 years ago is when Victory Real Estate Group was started. And we did our first retail project, which is actually called Jenna Plaza, named after my oldest sister. And that was our first big, honestly, retail project where, my father was the GC, he was the broker, he did everything on that. And when I say we come from Generation 1.5, or myself and my twin brother, we are Generation 1.5 because our weekends were spent on those construction sites and we got to see the growth in our family. So that's how Victory was started. And year to date now, I now work for the family office. I run our leasing division, and I've been with the company for about 2.5 years now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what would you say growing up was one of the most, I mean, you described your dad as a mentor. When I just hear you talk about your family, there's a lot of pride and and love that I can tell that you have for your family. So what were some of those things growing up that really stood out to you that either your parents did or ways that you started to get involved?
My brother and I have been driving sites since we were in a car seat, right? We've kind of grown up in the real estate world, and since I was 12 years old, I've been an intern in the office, right? So I've been able to see things like property management, brokerage, accounting at such an early stage. And I found what I loved, right? And I also learned from all the people around me, right? We've learned that you've got to work hard for the things that you want. And in our family, it's not given to you. You've really got to earn your stripes, right? Because there's so many of us, right? I'm the oldest of 7 siblings. So, each individual is different. So we're all taught to work hard and to appreciate the things that we have because, we've seen it firsthand. It didn't start like that.
Yeah. What is it like having 7 siblings and kind of what are the roles that people, I mean, you're obviously only 20, so I'm assuming your youngest siblings are still young and there's a lot of kind of runway ahead to see kind of what their roles are going to look like. But what does that look like for you guys today?
Of course, it's a blast. My youngest sibling is 4 years old, and it's funny because I feel more like an uncle than I do a big brother. But, the house is always full of life. It's exciting. It's fun, and it's, I enjoy every moment with the family. Our Sundays are all spent together. That's how close we are.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And how did that experience of closeness growing up shape your values or shape your sense of responsibility to the family?
It's played a big role because since we've all grown up so close, we all do things together, right? Our end goal is not, oh, you go do this, and we're all separate. The way we view our family is we're all one pot. We all do things for the family. Yes, someone might do their own thing. I'm sure I'll have plenty of siblings that might not work in the business. That's not what I'm saying. It's more about us being together and knowing that, you've got a tribe behind you, no matter what you end up doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that distinction or that difference between family and working. But speaking of working, I think you had an interesting journey. I mean, if you started interning at age 12, like what does it sort of looked like for you working inside of the family business? What are some of the different roles that you've played over the years?
So many, many different roles. I was in brokerage. I was showing up I wasn't always working under my dad. I was working under other people in the company who I appreciate. They've never really treated me like I'm, the boss's son. I was showing up at 6 a.m., doing the hard work, going out to properties. For a year I was out on projects pouring concrete, doing the hard jobs. But, that's shaped what I've enjoyed to do. I'm on the development side, leasing, and I love the deal making side. So I've been able to appreciate the job that I'm in now, right? Because I started off in an analyst position where I was, doing performas, modeling, a typical analyst role. But naturally, as when you work in a family business, you get to see things that other people don't get to see so quickly, right? So, 6 months in, I'm already negotiating leases and letters of intent, and I'm putting together financial packages, and I'm involved in conversations with banks, things like that. So it's all happened so quickly, but I wouldn't trade it for anything, And to give a little bit of background about Victory today, we're a large mixed-use developer, and we are a leader in our industry, right? And we have a multi-tenant division where we constantly work with the top 200 brands building retail buildings. And we bring in big anchors in the back, and we have a single tenant division we redevelop for people like Starbucks and Chipotle and Dutch Brothers, people like that. So I have a strong focus on the leasing division, which naturally is multi-tenant and single tenant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. And so that's how long have you been in this role that you just described?
So I've been in this role for about a year and a half now, I'd say.
Okay. And what feels most exciting? I mean, you described some of the things, but what's exciting and what's stretching you the most in your role right now?
So what's the most exciting is putting a deal together. I love working with these great concepts, because we build everywhere, and being able to bring, like a velvet taco to a city where they might not have it. That's exciting, and something new that's been stretching my role is now that I'm getting involved in development. my evenings are now spent at city council meetings and planning and zoning. It's been really interesting to see, and that's the true bread and butter of our business is the development, right? So that is my focus now, and the leasing is after hours now. So that's been a stretch for sure.
Yeah. And if someone listened or read your bio, they'd be like, oh, 20, and you've been working for a year and a half. So what's the backstory on college? I know you said that you tried it and decided to come back straight into the business. What was kind of your thought process there?
I did, yes. So long story short, I actually finished high school virtually because I wanted to start working, right? I was going to a boarding school right outside of Boston because I had the impression I was going to go play sports in college. Had a few opportunities, but very quickly found out that wasn't my focus anymore. I didn't love it like I used to. So I came back and I wanted to start working because I knew that I loved the deal-making side, right? So that was the whole point of how I ended up coming back to Dallas. And naturally, that's how I started working, right? And to answer your question of how I ended up leaving school is whenever I started working, I didn't want to have the regret of not going to college, right? Having that experience. And I knew it might not have been for me anymore, but I didn't want to regret anything. So while I was working in my first year, I ended up applying to a school called SMU. And I went there after I got accepted, right? I was like, let me just try it out. I'm going to continue to work and see how it goes. So I went to SMU. It's a great university. I did enjoy it. But if I wasn't in class, you weren't going to find me on campus. I was back in the office, and everything I was learning in the office was so much more advanced than everything that was happening in school, so I had to make a decision of what's most important to me. So, and that was a sacrifice I did have to make. So after my first semester, I dropped out and I continued with the business because, we're in growth mode right now and I want to be a part of that growth. And I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I see the pot. I see what's important to me. So that's how I ended up dropping out of school.
Yeah, that's cool. And I know you have kind of a learning and a growth mindset, definitely. And we'll talk about the peer group in a little bit. I think it's fair to say that there's so many other ways to learn, and learning by doing is a fabulous way. So I think that's really interesting. That's why I wanted this space to exist, is people have so many different paths. Like someone I talked to a couple weeks ago, their family governance requires that everyone goes at least 2 years and works outside of the business. And it sounds like in yours, because of how fast the company's growing right now, it was like, if you want to come be a part of this and grow with us, that's great. And I'm sure that kind of ties in a little bit into what your dad is thinking about the future of the business and maybe what you're thinking about the future of the business. I know you're only 20. Have you guys started talking about this at all? What the future looks like?
Of course we have. That's a conversation that comes up almost every day. My father's worked extremely hard and he's at the point where he just wants to step back. And we're working on creating the teams right now so we can do so. Just 2 years ago was the first time he had left the office for more than 2 weeks, and it's changed his life. I think he's in the position where if you asked him, he would say, I'm ready for my kids to take over, but we need to understand every part so that can actually happen. But, we've been fortunate enough to where we've hired a really great CFO and COO who's been taking over the day-to-day, which has helped. And ultimately, these two individuals are going to be helping lead our family office. So that's been a big part about the structure and what the future is going to look like for Victory, right? Because it's all hands on deck, right? If we're going to create this and continue to move forward and hopefully, it's generation after generation and we can continue the growth, that's what we're going to have to do.
And how are you thinking about your role in the future? Like, what are your aspirations, or what are you kind of pushing and thinking towards right now?
For me, growth is a huge thing. What we're working on is me growing in my position, right? I've been able to understand the leasing side. Now it's time to learn the development. So for me, I'm trying to learn every aspect of the business. So, one day I can be in a position where I understand all of these things and I'm able to provide more insight on these things and leading into growth, right? Our retail development is primarily focused in DFW. Now it's time to start moving outside of Texas and that's the part of the growth I'm going to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And I know that you have a couple of things that you're doing outside of the family business as well, and kind of your own growth and entrepreneurship space. Can you talk a little bit about both of those?
Sure. Well, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this already, but Victory doesn't raise capital. As a practice, my father doesn't raise capital. That's not something he's really ever wanted to be a part of. But part of our growth is that I believe we should be raising capital, not because we need to, but because that creates those long-term relationships, and it can be rinse and repeat. And I think it is good for growth, right? So I started a company called Retail Equity, which raises capital for our multi-tenant division. We've got about 46 developments going on right now. I'm probably doing a capital raise for 2 of those. And we're not here to raise, have 50 investors. I'm here to create 2 or 3 that are, amazing for us to do a lot of these developments with. And it's strictly on our multi-tenant division, which is essentially a 10 to 20,000 square foot building that we build, and we plug and play with all the great tenants we work with. And they're focused on quick turnarounds, right? So that's what Retail Equity does. And our family trust backs 50%, and I essentially go raise the other 50%, and Victory develops it.
Okay.
So that's
was there any tension there, like with like if your dad was kind of anti-capital raising before? It sounds like obviously with the family backing 50% of it that there's buy-in now, but what did sort of that process look like when you had this idea and you felt like you wanted to kind of add this division or add this thing? What did that discussion and process look like to bring that in?
Yeah, of course. I've always asked that question to my dad, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? And it's not something he's ever wanted to entertain. And I've expressed my interest in it for a few years now. And when I told him about the idea of Retail Equity, he understood why I'm doing it. And part of the next generation is we have new ideas. We're innovative. We want to change the way we do things. And that's for the better sometimes, right? And the generation before us might not always understand that, but sometimes it works out. So that's kind of the approach that we've had to it. And he understands exactly why I want to do it. And I think my father understands it is important for our growth many years ahead. Right. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, he understands it and he supports it. Right. He just doesn't want to have to be the one who is doing that, because he's trying to get into retirement mode.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. But it sounds like you were able to have a good conversation around what the future really could look like and kind of your idea and bringing, because I know that's a tension that a lot of next gens face is like, how do I do something new or innovative or like bring my perspective and my ideas into this existing infrastructure? And in some family businesses, like having to fit into the mold of the way things have always been done can feel really heavy. And so I wanted to appreciate that it sounds like you're starting to really carve out your own kind of space and the structure of this. Is it under the same Victory group? Is it really your own sort of separate entity or business that's kind of feeding Victory, or how did that all get structured?
Yeah, so it's its own entity and it's separate from Victory. Victory has essentially no involvement with it. It's me going out and raising the fund for the fund, and Victory is the developer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's cool. I love that innovation kind of within and adjacent to the business, but still separate, because then you have a lot of equity and ownership over that piece, but it still supports the enterprise and the growth of the family. So
Of course. And that's a big sticking point to our conversations, right? Because something I've always emphasized to my father is, for me, I don't want to come into the business and just plateau the whole time. I want to be able to have new ideas. I want us to be around, right? Mm-hmm. I don't want us to be shirt sleeve to shirt sleeves, Mm-hmm. The third generation should be able to also have new ideas and innovate. And, I might be in that position where I'm like, hey, I don't know about this, but it might work. You got to understand and listen to the people that have new ideas, right? I think that's a really important thing. And I'm very grateful that we are able to have those open conversations, good or bad.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think your entrepreneurial spirit came from? Because I hear that a lot in you. I'm also the oldest, just of 3 in my family, but I watched my dad really grow this business, and that was super inspiring to me. And so that's my story of how I don't know, just like growing up, I think I hit middle school and I was like, I'm going to do my own thing, or I'm going to start my own business, or I'm going to be entrepreneurial like my dad. That was just something I feel like I've always had with me. But was there like a moment or something for you where you really felt kind of that desire or entrepreneurial spirit come?
I think so. Again, I've gotten to see an entrepreneur every day, but the drive and the growth that he has, I admire that. He's someone who, yes, he's done great things in his life, but he's always trying to build off of that. And something that I've always noticed is, my father's the kind of guy who's up at 5 a.m. So when I was younger, I was always up super early and still am, because I'm like, well, if he's this successful and he's up this early, why should I be sleeping in? That's the kind of ideas that I've had, and what's kind of instilled the motivating factors in me.
Yeah. Okay. And I know we need to go back to NextGenX, but before we do that, let's just touch a little bit on the family office. I know there's some work that you're kind of doing to start to think about family governance and family office. Can you just talk a little bit about what you're learning in that process of starting to think about what that looks like for your family?
Yeah, we're in the preliminary stages of creating our family office, I would say. So it's all hands on deck, and I'm getting to see firsthand what's going into that. So, the way our family is you've got to work for it, right? And not everyone is required to join the family business, but they have to do something in order to create their own path, right? That's kind of how our family is structured, but we are in those preliminary stages of setting that up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything that you're sort of looking forward to, or like big questions that you still have about what that's going to look like?
I've been researching, and I've learned a lot about family offices in general, I'd say these last 6 months, but I'm interested, and I learn a lot from the people in my organization about how family offices are structured, right? Because we're essentially a newer family. Something that's interested to me is, hey, what about Generation 4, right? Because a lot of families have requirements in order to join the family office. We're early, so we don't necessarily have those requirements yet, but I'm sure we will. And I'm interested to see what those requirements might look like. Is it a certain amount of years in school? Is it a certain amount of years working for a competitor, or just having outside experience, right? Those are some things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's a nice segue in, because you said from your organization, from your peers and people that you're learning from. So tell us about NextGenX, your peer group, why you decided to start it.
Sure. Well, in 2023, when I left school and came back to Dallas, I wanted to join an organization similar to one that my dad was a part of, called Tiger 21, which I know you're very familiar with, and I've grown up around them, right? I've loved it, and I wanted to join a group similar to that in 23, and I looked and looked and looked, and I very quickly came to the conclusion that there were very few out there for a young 18-year-old like me to join, right? So I thought, why not just start my own? So I launched NextGenX, which is a true peer-to-peer network focused on the next generation of wealth. And I started this with a good friend of mine I grew up with. His name is Carter Crow. He comes from a family which is also heavy in real estate. They started the Trammell Crow Company and Crow Holdings, so he understands that background as well. And we launched this group together, and it's grown very quickly. And it's interesting. It started out as a group where I was just trying to connect young minds together who are in similar positions, right? Some are joining the family business. Some want nothing to do with the family business. Some are entrepreneurs. Some aren't entrepreneurs. So it's interesting to have so many different generations come together and share ideas, share perspectives, and just build a good relationship, right? Because our group has people that are generation 1.5 like myself, and we have people that are in generation 6, right? So the perspectives and the knowledge that people have are so different, and it's so great to be able to learn from that.
Yeah. But I know for these peer groups, there's a certain type of mindset or like values that someone has to come forward. So who are the kinds of people that are the right fit for your room?
Of course, yeah. Character is a huge thing for us. I can confidently say there's no ego in our room. We host about 4 meetings each year at a place called Old Parkland here in Dallas, where all of our members come together, and that's a chance for us to share ideas, right? That's a place where we get to find out who's who, you know? And we bring in speakers at the end of every meeting that cover different topics, and getting to hear people's questions, that tells a lot about someone and what they're thinking about, right? But someone who is a good individual for our organization is, first, we look at character. You know, we look at the type of background they come from, right? There's so many different backgrounds. It's very diverse. So we look at those things, right? How does it complement our group, and how can we provide something for them, right? It has to be a two-way streak. We also look at what they're doing. Some people are with the family office. Some people are next in line, right? Those are the types of things that we look for.
Cool. And what's something that you've personally learned from being in that room, with those people?
Understanding someone else's perspective. And, you know, sometimes you have to put yourself in their shoes and understand where they come from when they say something. And that's something that I've really taken to heart, and that's helped a lot of people.
Yeah, I love that. And I know, because I've been in a couple peer groups myself. The first peer group that I joined, called GoBundance, was really focused more on the entrepreneurial side, but not so much on the rising gen side. And that was always something that felt a little bit just like missing, right? When that's part of your story and family wealth, depending on your situation and where you go to school and the friend groups that you have, there are conversations that can't always happen, or things that you're like, just like working in a family business or having a family office, these things can feel very isolating sometimes. So can you just like describe, I know this because I've been in peer groups before, or I have this podcast and opportunities to talk with rising gens and people who work in family business all the time. So there's something special about the uniqueness of those conversations. But can you just like kind of describe the types of conversations that have an opportunity to happen in a room like this that don't always happen at home or with other friend groups or even within the business itself?
Sure. Well, I can definitely relate to that. You also don't want to be in a situation where it feels like you're gloating or you're sharing something that other people won't understand by any means, right? And that is why these meetings are so important. We give time in our meetings at the beginning of the meeting where people get to share what they've been up to, right? At every meeting, someone gives a recommendation to the group. At every meeting, someone gets to share their personal highlight and challenges that's been happening. And that's a chance where people get feedback from other people and also just get to share in a room full of like-minded people. And our group has a good balance between legacy and personal development. We highlight both because both of those are so important. You might only talk about the legacy piece, but you won't know what someone does, right? Hey, where do they go to school? How many siblings do they have? What do they like to do on the weekends? All of that's super important as well. Because with our generation, and specifically a group like this, we are so relational and not transactional. Money's great and money's important, but the people of our generation want to have purpose, they want to be authentic, and they want to be able to relate to someone. That's how they get motivated, right? So that's a big part about our meetings. Yeah,
that's super cool and super important. So I'm so happy to hear that you're doing this and the group is growing. I know you're thinking of opening, you started in Dallas and you're looking at other chapters in DC. So I think that I'm just really excited to continue cheering on your growth. If people wanted to reach out to you to either learn more about NextGenX or any of the other projects that you're doing, how could they reach out to you?
I can provide the websites for both organizations, and feel free to add my email on.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put those in the show notes as well for everyone to contact. Okay, let's end with the 3 closing questions. I appreciated our time today. I think a good story about just what being Generation 1.5 looks like, and that growth and the power of peer networks, and really just how you continue to innovate and grow a business that maybe wasn't yours, but is becoming yours by nature of it being a family business, and your father making an invitation for you and anyone in your family who wants to come in to do that. So I think that's awesome, and I appreciate our conversation. The 3 closing questions, let's start with the first one. What have you chosen not to inherit?
chosen to not to inherit for me. I would say for me, we've always operated on keeping costs as low as possible, right? That's a big thing in the business. For me, I have not inherited that. I believe in building big teams that are needed in order to help innovate and grow, right? And that's not all. That's been a harder conversation we've had throughout the years, but that's something that I'm really big on. I think structure is super important for growth, and that's something I've chosen to not inherit, and something I've chosen to inherit is that structure and being able to put those systems together. That's something that's really big for me.
And what's a part of your story that you're learning to honor right now?
Learning to honor. I'd say valuing and appreciating the legacy of our family, but also creating my own path, right? Because I want to continue to honor that forever, but I have new ideas that may be different, right? So that's something that I'm still working on today.
Yeah. Awesome. And lastly, in one word, what are you the first of in your family?
That's a good question. I like that. Legacy. I'm the first in my family who's going to carry on and build a legacy. And that's not something our family has had to deal with before. There's never been a pot. There's never been something that a family member is going into within the family, right? So legacy is what I'm the first of in my family.
Awesome. That's great. Well, JR, it was so awesome having you on the podcast. I appreciate your time and sharing your story with our group, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. That's it for today. I hope today's episode offered some clarity or at least a little company. If this resonated, I'd be so grateful if you'd share it with another Next Gen. While my podcast is for the Successors, you can also check out its sister show, The Business Transition Roadmap, hosted by my business partner, Elizabeth Ledoux. There's lots of great material in business and family succession over there. I hope you'll take a listen. Be well, and see you next time.